I had kept my father's jailhouse ledger for 2 years by the time they brought Wyatt Lowe in chained at the wrists, and I want to say plainly that I did not believe, from the very first hour I saw him sitting in that cell, that he had done what the town had already decided he'd done. I had a reason for that belief that had nothing to do with the evidence and everything to do with a name I had not spoken out loud in 8 years, and I did not tell my father what that reason was. Not that first night, and not for 2 of the 3 days I had left before the circuit judge rode into Millbrook to hear the case against him. My name is Emmeline Cross, though everyone in Millbrook, Kansas had called me Emmy since before I could walk, and I was 24 years old that October, keeping the ledger and most of the actual daily business of the sheriff's office for a father whose eyes had been failing him for 3 years in ways neither of us had told the town council, because a county that learned its sheriff could no longer read a warrant clearly was a county that would vote him out inside a season. And my father had nowhere else to go and no other trade at 58. So I read him the warrants. I wrote the reports in a hand steady enough to pass for his own. I kept the ledger of who was arrested and for what, and on whose testimony. And I had done this quietly and carefully for 2 years without a single soul in Millbrook suspecting that the sheriff's clear, orderly paperwork was in fact entirely my hand and increasingly my judgment. If Wyatt Lowe hanged for a robbery he did not commit, 3 things would be true at once, and I understood all 3 clearly by the second hour of his confinement. An innocent man would be dead. My father's name, already resting on foundations shakier than the town knew, would carry that death in the ledger under his signature for the rest of his life. And I would have let it happen twice, in the same jail, under the same office, with the same 3-day window between arrest and circuit judge that had taken my brother Daniel from us 8 years before, for a crime the real man responsible had confessed to a full 2 years too late for it to do Daniel any good at all. I have not told this part of the story to many people, but I will tell it now, because it is the reason none of what follows makes sense without it. My brother Daniel was 20 years old when a stagecoach robbery outside Millbrook left the driver dead, and the circumstantial case against him, a horse matching a description, money in his coat that turned out, 2 years too late, to have come from an entirely honest sale of cattle, was strong enough, and the town's appetite for a quick answer was hungry enough, that the circuit judge heard the case in one afternoon, and my father, then a young deputy, still finding his authority, did not push back hard enough against a conclusion the whole town had already reached before the judge ever arrived. Daniel was hanged 11 days later. The actual robber confessed on his own deathbed in Abilene 2 years after that, to a crime that had already cost my family the one thing we never got back. My father has carried that morning in his own particular silence every day since, and I have carried it as the specific, private vow that if I ever again saw an innocent man standing where my brother once stood, I would not let the ledger close on him without a fight, whatever it cost me to make one. Wyatt Lowe was a drifter, which was in itself the whole of the case against him in the minds of most of Millbrook before a single fact was properly weighed. He had ridden into town on the Tuesday, taken a room at the boarding house, and been seen at the bank that same afternoon inquiring, entirely openly, about a small account transfer connected to seasonal ranch work he'd lined up 2 counties over. The bank was robbed that same night, $1,100 taken from the safe, and Wyatt was found the next morning 3 miles outside town with $200 of marked bills in his saddlebag that he swore, from the very first hour of his arrest, he had never put there himself. I did not believe him because he seemed harmless. I want to be honest that plenty of harmless-seeming men have done considerably worse than rob a bank. I believed him because the ledger itself, the one I had been keeping faithfully for 2 years, did not add up the way the town's story required it to, and I had spent 2 years learning to notice precisely that kind of discrepancy, the way another woman might learn to notice a wrong note in a hymn she had sung 100 times. The bank's own daily balance sheet, which Gideon Pratt had provided to my father the morning after the robbery, with the particular smooth efficiency of a man who had clearly prepared it in advance, showed exactly $1,100 missing, which was, on its face, a perfectly ordinary figure for a robbery of that safe's known contents. But I had copied that same balance sheet into my own ledger 3 weeks earlier for an unrelated county audit, the kind of routine paperwork nobody but a ledger keeper ever actually reads twice, and the figure I had copied then did not match the figure Gideon Pratt now claimed had been stolen. The bank, according to my own 3-week-old copy, should have held considerably less than $1,100 in that safe the night of the robbery, which meant either Gideon Pratt's numbers were wrong then, or they were wrong now, and a banker does not make that particular kind of arithmetic mistake by accident. I went to see Wyatt Lowe in his cell the evening of his second day, ostensibly to update the ledger with his formal statement, which was in fact entirely true and also entirely not the whole of my reason for being there. "You keep asking me the same 3 questions," he said, when I sat down across from the bars with my ledger open on my knees. "Different words each time, same 3 questions. I've answered them the same way every time because it's the truth, and truth doesn't improve with repeating, but you keep asking anyway, like you're waiting for a different answer to fall out of me by accident." "I'm not waiting for a different answer," I said. "I'm listening for whether the same answer holds up the same way each time, in the same order, with the same details, because a lie changes shape with repetition and the truth generally doesn't. Yours hasn't changed once." I looked at him steadily. "That's not nothing, Mr. Lowe, whatever this town has already decided about you." He studied me a moment with the particular careful attention of a man who has learned, through hard experience, not to trust kindness offered without a clear reason attached to it. "Why do you care whether my story holds up?" he asked. "Every other soul in this county's already decided I'm guilty of something, on account of being a stranger passing through at an unlucky moment. Why not you?" I did not tell him about Daniel that evening. I want to be honest that the confession did not come easily even much later, when he had earned considerably more of my trust than a stranger of 2 days generally earns. "Because the ledger doesn't hold up either," I said instead, which was also true and safer to say out loud. "And I've learned to trust the ledger over the town's opinion, most days." The historical machinery working against Wyatt Lowe was, I want to be clear, entirely ordinary for that decade and that part of Kansas. The circuit judge covering our county wrote a fixed route through 6 counties on a schedule set months in advance, arriving in Millbrook only twice a year, which meant a man accused between visits could sit in a small jail for the better part of a season awaiting trial. And the particular urgency of Wyatt's case, the reason we had only 3 days rather than 3 months, was the simple accident of timing. The judge was due through Millbrook that same week regardless, on his way to Council Grove, and Gideon Pratt had made certain, through the particular quiet influence a bank owner carries in a small county, that Wyatt's case would be added to that same docket, rather than waiting for the judge's spring circuit, when cooler heads and slower investigation might have found considerably more room to breathe. I spent the whole of the second day going through 2 years of my own ledger entries with the particular exhausting thoroughness of a woman searching for one specific inconsistency in a haystack of her own careful handwriting. And I found it in an entry from the previous spring, an unremarkable notation about a delayed shipment of bank fixtures that Gideon Pratt had explained, at the time, as an ordinary supply delay. Cross-referenced against the freight company's own manifest, which I obtained by writing a carefully worded letter to the station master in Topeka, under my father's signature. That shipment had actually been a safe upgrade, installed quietly 6 months before the robbery, of a make and model considerably harder to force than the one the town believed the bank still used, which meant the robbery, as Gideon Pratt had described it to my father, an amateur forcing of an old safe in under an hour, could not have physically happened the way his own account claimed. I brought this to my father on the evening of the second day, reading him the freight manifest slowly and carefully, in the particular tone I used for anything requiring his full attention, rather than his failing eyes. And I watched his face do the specific difficult work of a proud man reconciling 2 years of unadmitted blindness with the sudden urgent need to trust his daughter's judgment over his own compromised sight. "You're telling me Pratt lied about his own safe," he said slowly. "I'm telling you the numbers don't hold together," I said. "And I think you know, better than most men in this county, what happens when a town lets numbers that don't hold together decide a man's fate anyway." My father was quiet a long moment, and I understood, watching him, that we had both arrived at the same unspoken place at the same time, the particular shared grief neither of us had properly discussed in 8 years. "Daniel," he said finally, and it was the first time either of us had said the name out loud to the other in longer than I could easily count. "Daniel," I said, "I am not going to watch this happen twice under your signature, Papa. I don't care what it costs either of us to stop it." He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in years, something between grief and a kind of relieved surrender, the particular look of a man who has been quietly failing at a job for 3 years and has just been told, gently, that someone capable has already been doing it in his place and is now asking permission to do it properly, out loud, where the whole county could see. "Then we'd better find the rest of it before Thursday," he said, "because a judge riding a 6-county circuit is not going to give us more time than the schedule allows, whatever we manage to prove." The confrontation with Gideon Pratt came the following morning, in his own bank office, with my father present in his official capacity, and myself present, technically, as the deputy clerk recording the interview, a title I had held on paper for 2 years without anyone in the county ever properly questioning what that title actually meant in practice. "I understand you have some questions about my account of the robbery," Pratt said, with the particular smooth composure of a man who had clearly rehearsed several versions of this conversation and was choosing, at that moment, the most reasonable-sounding one available. "We have a freight manifest," my father said, in the steady voice I had helped him rehearse the night before, "showing your safe was upgraded 6 months ago to a model that cannot be forced the way you described to me the morning after the robbery. I'd like you to explain that discrepancy, Mr. Pratt, before this goes any further." I watched something in Gideon Pratt's face do the very small, very telling work of a man recalculating, in real time, how much of his careful construction had just come apart. And for one long moment I thought he might simply deny it outright. The particular brazen confidence of men who have never once had to answer for anything meaningful in their comfortable lives. "The safe wasn't forced," he said instead, quieter now, some of the composure finally cracking. "I opened it myself, the night of the supposed robbery, and moved the money to cover a shortfall in the county infrastructure fund I'd been managing on the side, an investment that hadn't matured the way I'd promised the town council it would. I never intended for anyone to hang for it. I intended to replace the funds quietly within the month, once the investment paid out, and I needed a story that would explain the missing money without exposing the shortfall. And Mr. Lowe arrived at exactly the wrong hour, asking exactly the kind of questions about account transfers that made him look, to anyone not looking closely, like precisely the man I needed him to be. I want to say I felt triumph in that moment, hearing a guilty man finally admit what I had already known in my bones for 2 days. But what I actually felt was something closer to the particular exhausted grief of watching history nearly repeat itself, for reasons no more substantial than a banker's convenience and a town's appetite for a quick, comfortable answer. "You planted the marked bills in his saddlebag," my father said. It was not quite a question. "I did," Pratt said, and had the decency, at least, to look at the floor rather than at either of us while he said it. "I am not a man who has ever hurt anyone with his own hands, Sheriff, and I want that understood. But I understand now that what I did was very nearly the same thing. I did not go to Wyatt Lowe's cell to tell him the news myself. I want to be honest about that, because it would make a tidier story if I had. But my father insisted on doing it himself, the particular stubborn insistence of a man reclaiming, in whatever small way remained available to him, some portion of the authority he had quietly ceded to his daughter over 3 difficult years. I stood beside him at the cell door while he unlocked it with hands that trembled slightly, and I watched Wyatt Lowe's face do the slow, careful work of a man afraid to believe good news too quickly, in case believing it turned out to be its own kind of mistake. "You're free to go, Mr. Lowe," my father said. "The actual party responsible has confessed, in full, this morning, in front of witnesses. I owe you a considerably more thorough apology than I have time to deliver properly right now, and I intend to deliver it anyway, once the paperwork's settled." Wyatt looked past my father to me, standing in the doorway with my ledger still under my arm, and something passed between us in that look that neither of us had words for yet. The particular recognition of 2 people who had spent 3 days circling the edges of something neither had been free to name while the outcome remained uncertain. "I have a question for your daughter," he said to my father. "If she's willing to answer it, now that I'm apparently allowed to ask questions of people again." My father, with the particular tact of a man who had raised a daughter capable enough to run half his office without his knowledge for 2 years, said something about paperwork requiring his attention elsewhere and left us at the open cell door in the particular privacy that only a very busy jailhouse can offer 2 people who need a moment alone. "Why did you believe me?" Wyatt asked. "From the first evening, before you'd found any of what you eventually found, you said the ledger didn't add up, and that's true enough. But ledgers don't usually earn a woman's trust in the man they're clearing. There was something else." I told him about Daniel then, for the first time in 8 years to anyone outside my own family, standing in that cell doorway, with the particular unguarded honesty that comes only after a genuine crisis has passed and left both people involved too tired to keep constructing careful versions of themselves. I told him about the stagecoach robbery, and the circumstantial coat money, and the 11 days between arrest and hanging, and the actual robber's deathbed confession 2 years too late to matter to anyone but my family's private, permanent grief. I couldn't watch it happen again, I said. Not under my father's signature, and not to a man I'd already started to believe, somewhere around the 2nd evening, whatever the ledger eventually proved or failed to prove. Wyatt was quiet a long moment, looking at me with an expression that had shed, entirely, the careful guardedness he had carried through most of our 3 days together. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said, "and I understand now why you kept asking the same 3 questions in different words. You weren't only listening for whether my story held up, you were listening for whether this time you'd catch it in time." "Yes," I said, "I was. He stayed in Millbrook considerably longer than the seasonal ranch work 2 counties over had originally required. And I want to say the courtship that followed was dramatic in some particular way, but it was not. It was, instead, built from the particular ordinary accumulation of a man helping repair the jailhouse's sagging back step because he'd noticed it needed fixing, and nobody had gotten around to it. And long evenings on my father's porch discussing county business my father could no longer properly see to review, and the slow, careful trust of 2 people who had each spent considerable time learning that the truth, told plainly and repeated consistently, was worth considerably more than anything offered with easier charm. Gideon Pratt served 4 years at the Territorial Prison in Leavenworth for embezzlement and obstruction, a sentence the circuit judge handed down that same Thursday, having arrived to find the docket considerably rearranged from what he'd expected. My father resigned as sheriff the following spring, on his own terms rather than the town council's, and recommended in the same letter that the county consider his daughter for the position of deputy clerk in an official rather than unofficial capacity, a recommendation the council accepted with considerably less surprise than either of us expected, since half the county had apparently suspected for over a year exactly whose hand had truly been keeping the ledger. Wyatt Lowe and I were married the following autumn, and my father gave me away with the particular quiet pride of a man who had spent 8 years carrying a grief he had never properly discussed, finally allowed, by his daughter's stubbornness and one drifter's fortunate arrival at exactly the right unlucky hour, to set at least part of that grief down. I still keep a ledger, though it is my own now, in my own name, in my own hand, without the careful pretense of matching another man's signature. I keep it the way I have always kept it, precisely, honestly, with an eye for the specific kind of discrepancy that most people never think to look for twice. And some evenings, when Wyatt asks me what I'm thinking about, sitting at that same desk with the lamp burning low, I tell him the truth, which is that I am thinking about my brother, and about 3 days that could have gone the same terrible way they went for him, and about the particular grace of a ledger that for once did not close on an innocent man before anyone thought to check the numbers twice.